The most obvious part of being Korean is being Korean by birth. However, there are many other qualities of being Korean that go beyond the birthright. For overseas Koreans, some may have the challenge of proving their Koreanness to the Korean society due to their multicultural background and influence. Especially if they're not too familiar with the Korean language or culture, many Koreans will tend to perceive them as not Korean enough. We interviewed 9 overseas Koreans about their experiences living in and outside of Korea, struggling with their cultural identity, and attempting to define themselves as multicultural Koreans. We also asked what makes them Korean.
I am Korean.
저는 한국 사람.
Je suis coréen.
Yo
soy coreana.
I was born in Korea in Seoul, and I moved to Vancouver when I was like 2 or 3. I moved back, but then afterwards I moved to Germany, Italy, India, and then back to Canada, but this time Toronto, in this town called Aurora.
So I was born in Korea, but I would say that I'm Korean American because I spent 10 plus years in the States.
For me, I grew up in Mexico and I was born there too.
I was born in Seoul in Korea, and I went to China when I was young, but I was mostly raised and grew up in Canada.
I was 4 when I went to Shanghai, and from that on until 2019 I was in Shanghai.
중2 때까지 중국에서 학교를 다니다가 중3 때 이제 스페인으로 넘어가서 고등학교 졸업하고.
So my name is Myung-sung and I grew up in South Africa.
I was born in Korea, but then I spent most of my life abroad. So I lived 5 years in Algeria, 5 years in France, 1.5 years in Greece, and 1.5 years in Dubai.
I was born in the States. I did live in the States for 4 years in elementary and middle school, but in high school I came to Korea and I went to Korean high school.
Korean would be my native language, English would be my second language, and then I learned a bit of Spanish and French during high school years.
I'm mostly fluent in English, and then Chinese, and then Korean.
English is my best. I speak it all the time. That's what I grew up in. Italian, I would say, is my second one. I would say Spanish would be third. It's close though, with German being fourth, and then lastly it would be Korean.
I would say that I'm the best at English, and then Korean, and then French.
The first one will be Spanish, then followed by English, and then last it will be Korean.
I think most of my younger years I rejected it because I was so fixed on fitting in with everyone else, so I definitely did reject it until the whole K-pop craze happened.
제가 초등학교는 중국 로컬 학교 다녔었는데 반에 저 혼자만 한국 사람이다 보니까 약간 저의 정체성에 대해서 좀 이상함 느꼈었는데.
I'm always proud of myself. I'm proud of everything, and I love myself. I love where I grew up.
I think I was always proud of my heritage, but there were times when I was distant from it. When I was in elementary school, I went to an international school in Korea, so I didn't really get that Korean experience of learning Korean history or the Korean language.
I came to accept my heritage and identity through home culture, like such as the traditional food, Korean food that my mom made for me.
중3 때 이제 스페인으로 넘어가서 아무래도 이제 외적으로도 이제 스페인 애들이랑 다르게 생겼고 스페인어도 잘 못했고 이제 소통이 안 되다 보니까 아무래도 인종차별적으로 조금 차별을 당했었던 것 같습니다.
Growing up, when I was in Germany, we used to be in this. I used to be in this baseball team full of just native Germans, and the breakfast that I used to eat, that my mom used to cook for us, is very Korean. So there's a lot of fish and there's seafood. So there's a distinct smell to it. And I would walk into the bus and then kids would just be like, ew, what's that smell?
My mom will pack me like Korean stuff, right? Like, I don't know, kimbap or like tteokbokki. And there were like people saying it will stink.
In Korea, the first thing they'll ask is, where did you come from? And I go, I'm Korean. And they go like, I know you're Korean, but where did you come from? I'm like, then it's something that I have to say over and over again. Okay, so I'm from China. Then they'll ask me, then why is your accent like American? I go, oh, because I went to an American school. This three stuff I have to always explain.
According to my parents, like my mom was accused of stealing from a supermarket when she didn't.
I do stand out among a majority white and black community, which it was many years back, not so much anymore, but when I entered a room, I would have some eyes turning to me just because of the way I looked. Just a few ching-chongs and ni-haos in the street. In Korea, not so much because I basically look like everyone, so appearance-wise, not really, but after people find out that I did grow up somewhere foreign, I do get some looks and some stereotypes happening.
I think I was an outsider 2 times in my life. The first when I went to America because I was Korean, and although I was pretty proficient in English, I didn't really know about that culture. And once I came back to Korea, I felt like an outsider because I wasn't Korean enough.
I think also in Korea, I think there is a certain level of, oh, he's not really Korean. Why is he not really Korean? He looks Korean, he is Korean. But why isn't he? Because I act in a sort of different way compared to other Koreans. It's like shunned upon that I am kind of different.
Language barriers are really important. There are times when like there are things that we can't like say in Korean, but we can really say well in English.
Every time I come back to Korea, like my friends sometimes would tease me when I don't know the meaning of a Korean word. They would tease me that I'm a foreigner, not a Korean.
It changed. It definitely changed.
Because UIC and UD itself is so diverse, it's a mixing pot. It's a mixing pot that allows for people and it encourages people to have different opinions, and that's what makes like class discussions really interesting.
I think there still exists a stigma about overseas Korean as, not being able to speak Korean as well, not kind of forgetting their motherland and being ignorant of some of the Korean aspects of it. But I think that now when I've come to university and these people who maybe had these stereotypes, when they interact with Korean Americans and learn more about them, we're able to overcome it.
I think it's largely due to the globalization, I guess. Like a lot of people are coming and leaving Korea.
This is really hard.
Korea is still defined by nature because of our homogeneous ethnicity and our long history.
I think it's by nurture, to be honest. There's a lot of things about the Korean collective where it's like you learn a lot about certain mannerisms.
한국에서 잘하지 않아도 충분히 한국인이 될 수 있다 생각하고, 일단 지금 저희 과만 봐도 외국에서 잘하는 애들이 많은데도 한국에서 사는 애들이랑 충분히 잘 어울리고 있고.
There are people of other ethnicities who have lived here much longer than me. My professor's been teaching at the school for more than 27 years.
If people are really passionate about Korea and they feel like they've truly become a part of the culture, they can associate themselves as Koreans.
I know a lot of people who identify as Korean even if they're not ethnically Korean, so I think it depends for everyone. There's no answer.
구독과 좋아요, 알림 설정까지 부탁드려요.
Cintagia todo rienzan, todo ganju,
Grazie ragazzi, se avete piaciuto la video,
Dale un like.
Thank you for watching.
Make sure you subscribe.
Merci!